The Chronomasters had exactly one rule about Earth. One! And honestly, considering they had approximately 9,473,612 rules about literally everything else in the observable universe, including the proper protocol for folding space-time napkins, this seemed rather lenient. The rule was simple: never, under any circumstances, interfere with human agricultural cycles, specifically, never strike during harvest season. They burned the fields anyway. Now, before we get into how this catastrophically stupid decision was made, you need to understand something about the Chronomasters. They were a species that had evolved beyond the need for physical bodies approximately 4 billion years ago, existing instead as pure temporal consciousness distributed across 17 dimensions. They maintained the cosmic schedule. Every supernova, every planetary rotation, every single moment when someone across the galaxy lost their car keys, it all happened precisely when it was supposed to happen because the Chronomasters made sure it did. They took their job very seriously, perhaps too seriously. The thing about beings who exist outside normal time is that they tend to view everything simultaneously. Past, present, future, all the possible futures, all the abandoned timelines where you did ask that person out, and it went terribly. They saw it all at once. This made them extraordinarily efficient at cosmic administration and absolutely terrible at understanding cause and effect from a linear perspective. Which brings us to Cronus 7. Junior Temporal Adjudicator, badge number 2847 TDLR 993, who had been doing this job for approximately 6 centuries and was, by Chronomaster standards, still considered the intern. Cronus 7 was having what could only be described as a monumentally bad millennium. He had just spent the last 300 years filing the paperwork for a minor timeline correction in the Andromeda sector, only to discover he had used the wrong form. Not the TPS-47 Temporal Paradox Suppression Form, but the TPR-47 Temporal Paradox Resolution Form, which was completely different and required an additional 4,000 pages of supplementary documentation. His supervisor, Aeon Prime, had been, let's say, displeased. Cronus 7, Aeon Prime had said, in that particular way temporal beings have of making a sound without actually making a sound. You need to demonstrate initiative, competence, the ability to complete a task without creating 6 new paradoxes in the process. So when the alert came through about an unauthorized temporal fluctuation near Sol 3, Cronus 7 saw an opportunity, a chance. Finally, something simple, a minor correction, barely worth mentioning in the daily report. He pulled up the file on Sol 3. Earth, they called it. Unremarkable little planet. Class M civilization. Barely post-industrial. The Chronomasters had been monitoring them for a few thousand years, ever since the humans figured out agriculture and started keeping track of time themselves, which the Chronomasters found both adorable and slightly insulting. The alert indicated a temporal anomaly in the agricultural sector of North American continent, Sector 7, subsection Iowa. A minor fluctuation, probably just some localized time dilation from improperly stored quantum fertilizer or something equally mundane. Standard protocol. Investigate, correct, file report in triplicate. Cronus 7 did not pull up the attached memo labeled Critical Human Agricultural Protocols, Mandatory Reading. Seriously, we mean it this time. He did not read the 47,000 pages detailing exactly why you should never, ever mess with human farming during harvest season. He certainly did not notice the section, helpfully highlighted in red, underlined and marked with 17 exclamation points, that explained what happens when you interrupt a human farmer during the one time of year they're actually making money. What Cronus 7 did do was initiate a standard temporal correction burst, which in normal circumstances would simply erase the anomaly and reset the localized timeline to its proper configuration. What Cronus 7 did not anticipate was that the temporal anomaly was actually Granville Thatch, fourth-generation farmer, standing in his wheat field at 3 in the morning, drinking terrible coffee from a thermos and having what he would later describe as a moment. Granville was 57 years old, had a back that sounded like a malfunctioning percussion section whenever he bent over, and was approximately 6 hours away from beginning the harvest that would determine whether he could keep his farm for another year or finally admit defeat and sell to that insufferable corporate conglomerate that kept sending him letters in increasingly aggressive fonts. He was contemplating the nature of time itself, wondering where the hell the last 30 years had gone, whether he should have listened to his ex-wife about diversifying crops, and if that weird pain in his left knee was arthritis or just general existential dread manifesting physically. This deep philosophical state, combined with the fact that he had been awake for 23 hours straight and had consumed enough caffeine to kill a medium-sized horse, created a very minor localized temporal field around his consciousness. Nothing dangerous, nothing that would normally even register on cosmic scales, but it was technically an anomaly. So when Cronus 7's correction burst hit Granville Thatch's wheat field at precisely 3:47 a.m. on September 23rd, the temporal energy had to go somewhere. It went into the wheat, all of it. 200 acres of Kansas red, 3 weeks from perfect harvest maturity, experienced approximately 6,000 years of entropic decay in the span of 4 seconds. There was a sound like reality clearing its throat apologetically. The wheat turned to ash. The ash turned to dust. The dust turned into a fine grey powder that might have been wheat once, but was now more of a philosophical concept than actual matter. Then, because the universe has a terrible sense of humor, a light breeze came up. Granville Thatch watched his entire harvest, his entire year, his entire future blow away across the Iowa countryside like someone had hit the delete button on his life savings. He stood there for a long moment, thermos still raised halfway to his lips, coffee cooling in the pre-dawn air. Then he said, "And I cannot stress this enough, the most cosmically significant thing any human has ever said in the history of the species. Well, shit." Cronus 7, observing from 17 dimensions simultaneously, felt something he had never felt before in 6 centuries of temporal administration. He felt dread. Not because he had destroyed a harvest. He barely understood what a harvest was. Not because he had violated protocol. He didn't even know there was a protocol yet. He felt dread because Granville Thatch, standing in the ruins of his entire livelihood, had just looked up at the sky, coffee thermos still in hand, and said, "I don't know who you are or what you are, but I know somebody did this, and I am going to find you. And then I am going to file a complaint." The word complaint echoed across 17 dimensions. The chronomasters, all of them, simultaneously accessed their collective records on humanity. They discovered something terrifying. Humans didn't have faster-than-light travel. They didn't have quantum weapons. They didn't have dimensional shifting technology or temporal manipulation or any of the things that normally made species dangerous to cosmic administrators. What they had was bureaucracy and lawyers. So many lawyers. Aeon Prime manifested in Cronus 7's dimensional workspace, which is the temporal equivalent of storming into someone's office unannounced. "Tell me," Aeon Prime said, with the kind of calm that precedes volcanic eruptions, "that you did not just interfere with human agriculture during harvest season. I may have performed a minor timeline correction in the agricultural sector of, did you read the memo?" "Which memo? There are 17,000 new memos The memo, Cronus! The one about farmers! The one that explains, in excruciating detail, why we do not, under any circumstances, interfere with human food production." Cronus 7 quickly accessed his message archive. He found the memo. He opened it. He read the first page, then the second. By page 47, he had reached the section titled Case Study 7, the Great Locust Incident of 1874, and why the humans still haven't forgotten. By page 932, he had reached Appendix R, What Happens When You Make a Farmer Miss Their Harvest Window, a comprehensive analysis of human vindictiveness across 27 documented cases. By page 12,004, he had reached the conclusion, which was helpfully printed in large, friendly letters. Seriously, just don't. Oh, Cronus 7 said, in a very small voice that echoed across no dimensions whatsoever. Oh, no. Oh, yes, Aeon Prime said. Do you understand what you've done? Do you have any idea what happens when you threaten a human's ability to feed themselves? When you destroy their work, their livelihood? I'm sure we can just file a formal apology, and they don't want apologies. They want compensation. They want justice. They want to speak to a manager, and they will pursue it through every legal channel they have. Do you know how many legal channels humans have? Do you? Cronus 7 accessed the database on human legal systems. His consciousness recoiled in horror. That can't be right. They have legal codes that reference older legal codes, that reference even older legal codes going back thousands of years. They have laws about laws about laws. Oh, it gets worse, Aeon Prime said, with the tone of someone who had seen things, terrible things, and would never quite recover. They have what they call precedent. Every decision builds on every previous decision. It's like temporal causality, but for arguing, and they're really good at it. Down on Earth, Granville Thatch had gone back to his house, made a fresh pot of coffee, and was now sitting at his kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, a calculator, and a determination that could probably be detected from orbit. He was making a list. The list was titled, Things I Need to Do Today. Item 1, call insurance company. Item 2, document everything. Item 3, find out who the hell vaporized my wheat. Item 4, make them pay for it. Item 5, probably call Ruby. She'll know what to do. Ruby Castellano was Granville's neighbor, his sometimes friend, his occasional pain in the neck, and most relevantly, a retired lawyer who had spent 40 years working in agricultural litigation before deciding that the stress was going to kill her, and she'd rather spend her remaining years raising goats and telling anyone who'd listen about the time she bankrupted an entire seed company through sheer spite and knowledge of contract law. She was exactly the kind of person you wanted on your side when mysterious forces vaporized your wheat. She was also exactly the kind of person the Chronomasters had nightmares about. Granville called her at 4:15 a.m. She answered on the second ring, because farmers and former lawyers who live next to farmers don't really sleep normal hours anyway. This better be good, Granville. My wheat field just turned into dust, all of it, in about 4 seconds, while I was standing in it. And there was a long pause. You drunk? I wish I was drunk, Ruby. I'm serious. Something happened. I don't know what. I don't know how. But I know it wasn't natural. And I know somebody is responsible. Another pause, longer this time. You want me to come look? I want you to bring your camera, your measuring tape, and that thing you do where you ask questions that make people realize they've already lost the argument. My professional demeanor, that's the one. Ruby Castellano arrived 20 minutes later, driving her beat-up pickup truck and carrying a briefcase that Granville was pretty sure she'd claimed was retired along with her legal career. She looked at the field, or what used to be the field, or what was now 200 acres of slightly grey dirt with the occasional patch of ash. She walked the perimeter. She took soil samples. She took photographs from 17 different angles. She measured the exact boundaries of the destruction. Then she turned to Granville and said something that would echo through cosmic administrative channels for the next 6 months. Granville, I don't know what happened here, but this is the most uniform destruction pattern I've ever seen. This wasn't weather. This wasn't blight. This wasn't even arson. This was precise, deliberate, and that means somebody did this, which means somebody is liable. Liable. Granville repeated, tasting the word like good whiskey. Liable, Ruby confirmed. And if there's one thing I learned in 40 years of law, it's that everyone is liable to someone. We just need to figure out who. Up in 17 dimensions, Cronus 7 was experiencing what could only be described as a panic attack, if panic attacks could occur across multiple temporal planes simultaneously. What do I do? What do I do? Aeon Prime sighed, which took approximately 6 seconds in normal time but felt like 6 years to Cronus 7. You file an incident report, full disclosure, complete documentation, and then you pray to whatever cosmic forces you believe in that the humans don't figure out how to file legal action across dimensional boundaries. But they can't do that. They don't have interdimensional communication. They don't even know we exist. Cronus 7, Aeon Prime said, with the patience of someone explaining something to a particularly slow child. Humans don't need to know you exist to cause you problems. They just need to suspect you exist. And once they suspect, they start investigating. And once they investigate, they start documenting. And once they document, they start filing things. And once the filing starts... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Cronus 7 was already accessing the historical records of species who had made the mistake of underestimating human bureaucratic tenacity. The Vorgarth Collective, who had accidentally destroyed a human colony ship in 2847, still paying reparations. The Silicate Concordance, who had claimed ownership of the moon based on ancient territorial laws, lost the case after 97 years of litigation. The Quantum Traders Guild, who had tried to establish a toll system on human trade routes, bankrupted within 15 years after humans found a loophole in their charter that technically made them subject to Earth's consumer protection laws. Humans didn't win because they were stronger. They won because they were more stubborn and had better record-keeping. Cronus 7 filed his incident report at 0500 hours station time. By 0501 hours, it had been escalated to the Temporal Council. By 0505 hours, an emergency session had been called. By 0510 hours, every single chronomaster who had any experience with humanity had been summoned to testify. The council chamber existed in a space between moments, where past and future met for awkward small talk and tried to avoid eye contact. It was decorated in what could only be described as aggressively bureaucratic, with filing cabinets that extended into dimensions most species couldn't perceive, and a water cooler that dispensed liquid time in small paper cups. High Counselor Epoch 9 presided over the emergency session, looking like someone who had just discovered that their retirement plans had been cancelled indefinitely. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Epoch 9 said, addressing the assembled chronomasters with the tone of a disappointed parent. "We have one rule about Earth. One rule. And somehow, we have managed to break it in the most catastrophic way possible." Cronus 7 wished he could sink through the floor, but floors don't really exist in 17 dimensions, which was just another disappointment in what was shaping up to be a very disappointing day. "In my defense," he began. "There is no defense," Counselor Entropy 5 interjected. She was old, even by chronomaster standards, and had been monitoring Earth since humans first figured out how to hit things with other things. "Do you know what humans do when someone destroys their crops? Do you have any idea? They file complaints, they go to war, they topple governments, they write folk songs about it that get passed down for generations. They hold grudges that last centuries, and that's when other humans do it. We're not even the same species. We exist in 17 dimensions, and you think they're just going to file a complaint?" "Actually," said Kronos 12, who had been quietly reviewing data in the corner, "according to current monitoring, that is exactly what they're doing." Everyone turned to look at him. "Explain," Epoch 9 commanded. Kronos 12 pulled up a holographic display that showed Granville Thatcher's kitchen. The image was frozen in time, showing Granville and Ruby sitting at the table, surrounded by papers, coffee cups, and what appeared to be a very old laptop computer. Subject Granville Thatch has retained legal counsel. Ruby Castellano, retired agricultural litigation specialist. Current activity: drafting a formal complaint to be filed with. He paused, checking his data. With everyone: the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Federal Aviation Administration, the Department of Defense, the National Weather Service, NASA, the UN, and most concerning, the Office of Extraterrestrial Contact, which apparently exists now because someone in the government had the foresight to create a bureaucratic department for this exact situation, and it's been sitting dormant for 60 years, waiting for something to do. The council chamber fell silent, which in 17 dimensions sounds like a very loud nothing. They're going to contact their government? Epoch 9 said slowly. They've already contacted their government, Kronos 12 confirmed, 47 minutes ago local time, and according to our projections, by this time tomorrow, there will be 6 different federal agencies investigating this incident, 3 news crews, and at least 1 congressional hearing. Congressional hearing, Kronos 7 whispered, having just accessed the relevant files on human political theatre. Oh no, oh no. Oh yes, Entropy 5 said with grim satisfaction. You know what happens at congressional hearings, Kronos 7? Testimony, under oath, recorded for posterity. And once that starts, once they get official statements on record, they can use those statements to build cases, legal cases, cases with precedent. Cases that will sit in their legal system like temporal landmines waiting to explode across our carefully maintained schedules. But they don't even know we exist. How can they file a case against someone they don't know exists? Ruby Castellano, sitting in Granville's kitchen approximately 93 million miles away and 17 dimensions down, was at that exact moment saying something that would answer that question perfectly. We'll file against unknown parties or entities, and it's a placeholder. Once we establish that someone is responsible, we can amend the filing. The important thing is to get it on record, make it official, start the clock on statute of limitations. Granville nodded slowly. You really think we can make someone pay for this, when we don't even know who they are? Ruby smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had spent 4 decades making corporations regret their life choices. Granville, I once successfully sued a company that didn't exist anymore for damages caused by a product they stopped making 20 years before the lawsuit. If there's a legal mechanism to hold someone accountable, I will find it. And if there isn't a legal mechanism, I will create one and make them pay the legal fees for the privilege of being prosecuted under it. I like the way you think. You're going to like the way I bill even better. I'm doing this pro bono. Ruby, you don't have to... Oh, I'm not doing this for you, Granville. I'm doing this because whatever did this pissed me off. You don't spend 40 years fighting for farmers' rights just to let some mystery force vaporize 200 acres of perfectly good wheat without consequences. This is about principle. Back in the council chamber, Epoch 9 was reviewing possible response strategies with all the enthusiasm of someone scheduling their own execution. Option 1. We ignore it. Pretend it never happened. Hope they forget about it. Humans never forget, Entropy 5 said flatly. They have museums dedicated to remembering things. They write it down. They teach it to their children. Give them 200 years and they'll have a holiday about this. Option 2, we send an emissary, make contact, explain what happened, offer compensation. Absolutely not, 3 councillors shouted simultaneously, which created a harmonic resonance that briefly destabilized causality in the Andromeda sector. Kronos 12 raised an appendage, or what would be an appendage if he had a body. If I may? Making formal contact with humanity is explicitly forbidden under Treaty 7749A with the Galactic Council. We've spent 10,000 years keeping them isolated until they develop proper dimensional awareness. If we break isolation protocol now, we'll have to file a treaty violation report, which requires the signatures of all 73 member species. takes approximately 400 years to process and will make the current situation look like a minor inconvenience by comparison. So we can't ignore it, and we can't address it directly, Epoch 9 summarized. Suggestions? There was a long silence. Then Cronus 7, with the courage of someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose, said, "What if we answered the complaint?" Everyone turned to stare at him. "Explain," Epoch 9 said carefully. "Well, humans file complaints with their government. Their government has procedures for handling unusual circumstances. The Office of Extraterrestrial Contact was created to handle contact scenarios. So, what if we used their own system against them, filed a response through official channels, stayed anonymous but engaged with their legal process?" "That is the stupidest idea I have ever heard," Entropy 5 said. "It's also the only idea we've got," Kronos 12 added helpfully. Epoch 9 considered this in 17 dimensions simultaneously, from multiple temporal perspectives, calculating probability matrices and outcome scenarios across 7,000 possible timelines. "It won't work," he concluded. "Probably not," Cronus 7 agreed. "It will make everything worse. Almost certainly. It will create precedents that will haunt us for millennia, without a doubt. But it's still better than doing nothing and waiting for humans to figure out interdimensional law on their own." "Yes." "Very well. Cronus 7, this was your mistake, so you get to fix it. Draft a formal response to be filed with the Human Office of Extraterrestrial Contact. Keep it vague. Admit to nothing specific. Offer compensation but no liability. And for the love of entropy, use the proper forms." Cronus 7 accessed the human legal database, which took approximately 7 minutes and made him wish he had chosen a different career path, like maybe maintaining black holes or cataloging dying stars. Something simple and straightforward. He discovered that humans had forms for everything. Forms for filing complaints. Forms for responding to complaints. Forms for appealing responses to complaints. Forms for filing complaints about the complaint forms. It was beautiful, terrible, a bureaucratic mandala of such complexity that it almost qualified as ART. He began drafting. 3 days later, local time, a very confused intern at the Office of Extraterrestrial Contact in Boulder, Colorado, discovered a document on his desk that had not been there when he left the previous evening. The document was formatted in perfect legal standard, printed on what appeared to be paper, but felt slightly wrong, as if the paper existed in more dimensions than paper should reasonably exist in. The header read, "Response to complaint, filed by Granville Thatch regarding Incident 2024-09-23 SOL3 Agri 047 in the matter of alleged property damage via unknown means, submitted by unknown respondent S via unspecified methods in compliance with Office of Extraterrestrial Contact Protocol 7, subsection 4, paragraph 12, Procedure for Anonymous First Contact Legal Response." Wachey, the intern, whose name was Derek and who had taken this job because it seemed like easy money for basically doing nothing, read the document 3 times. Then he called his supervisor called her supervisor. That supervisor called the director called Washington called everyone. By noon, the document had been analyzed by cryptographers, physicists, lawyers, and one very confused postal inspector who was trying to figure out how something had been delivered to a secure government facility without passing through any detectable security checkpoints. The document was authentic, the legal reasoning was sound, the formatting was perfect, and most importantly, it admitted fault, not explicitly, not in any way that could be used against them. But the document acknowledged that an incident occurred, and that affected parties deserve consideration, and that appropriate compensation would be determined pending proper documentation of damages. It was the most carefully worded non-admission of guilt in the history of legal documentation. Ruby Castellano read it 17 times, made 43 pages of notes, and then called Granville. "You're not going to believe this. Try me. I've had a weird week." They responded. Whoever they are, they actually responded to the complaint, through official channels, with proper legal documentation. Granville was quiet for a moment. They admitted they did it? Not exactly, but they didn't deny it either. They acknowledged the incident. They've agreed to arbitration. Granville, they're taking this seriously. So what do we do now? Ruby grinned, even though Granville couldn't see it through the phone. Now we make them regret ever messing with Iowa wheat farmers. Get your documentation together. Every receipt, every expense, every hour of labor. We're going to calculate damages, and we're going to make it hurt. Ruby: yes, I really like the way you think. Over the next 6 weeks, something unprecedented happened in human history. The U.S. government, working through the Office of Extraterrestrial Contact, officially engaged in legal arbitration with an unknown party that existed in dimensions they couldn't perceive, using laws they had written assuming this would never actually happen over the destruction of 200 acres of wheat in Iowa. The media, naturally, lost their minds. News crews descended on Granville's farm like locusts, which was ironic considering what they were covering. Every major network wanted an interview. Conspiracy theorists declared victory. Religious groups couldn't decide if this was proof of God or proof against God. The internet exploded with speculation, memes, and at least 7,000 new theories about what really happened. Granville gave exactly one interview to the local news, in which he said, "Something destroyed my wheat. I don't know what. I don't know why. But I know my rights, and I know that somebody owes me compensation." That's all this is. Simple property law. Doesn't matter if it was a tornado, a corporation, or little green men from Mars. You break it, you bought it. The interviewer tried to press for more details, more speculation, more drama. Granville just stared at the camera and said, "I'm a farmer. I don't do drama. I grow wheat, or I did, until somebody vaporized it. Now can you please get off my property? You're standing on my barley field." The clip went viral. 30 million views in the first day. Someone made a t-shirt. Someone else made a folk song. Granville ignored all of it and focused on filling out Form 47B, documentation of agricultural losses for claims against unknown parties or entities, which was a form that had been created specifically for this case and would probably never be used again in human history. He listed everything. Seed costs, fertilizer costs, fuel for the tractor, water, labor hours calculated at fair market rate for agricultural work, lost revenue from the harvest he would have had, projected income for the next 5 years based on crop rotation schedules, emotional distress, which Ruby insisted he include even though it felt weird to him. The final total came to $487,643.27, not including legal fees. It was, by cosmic standards, a laughably small amount of money. By farmer standards, it was everything. Cronus 7 reviewed the damages claim and felt something that could only be described as relief mixed with existential horror. That's all?" he said to Aeon Prime. "That's what they want? Not territorial concessions, not technology, not access to dimensional travel, just money? Money that they can use," Aeon Prime corrected. "Look at the itemization. It's not arbitrary. Every single item is documented, justified, calculated according to their own agricultural economic models. They're not trying to exploit us, Cronus. They just want to be made whole, to be put back where they were before you vaporized their wheat." Cronus 7 calculated the energy expenditure required to generate that amount of human currency through their standard temporal manipulation protocols. That's I could do that in 6 seconds. Then do it. Pay the damages. Close the case. And please, for the love of causality, let's never speak of this again. But it wasn't that simple. Because humans had lawyers, and lawyers had questions. Ruby Castellano filed a motion demanding verification of payment source. She wanted proof that whoever was paying these damages had legitimate funds and wasn't just printing counterfeit money or manipulating financial systems. She also filed a motion demanding ongoing monitoring to ensure that this never happened again, and a motion demanding transparency about what had caused the incident in the first place, and a motion demanding environmental impact assessment of any future temporal correction bursts in agricultural zones. She filed 14 motions in total, each one more comprehensive than the last, each one creating new legal precedents, each one making the chronomasters regret every decision that had led them to this point. Epoch 9 reviewed the motions with a feeling that could only be described as cosmic despair. "She's trying to establish regulatory framework," he said, almost in awe. "She's not just trying to win this case. She's trying to create laws that will govern all future interactions between humans and dimensional beings. She's trying to make US subject to their legal system." "Can she do that?" Cronus 7 asked. "I don't know. Nobody knows. This has never happened before. We've maintained isolation for 10,000 years, and now, because of one stupid mistake, we're potentially going to end up as defendants in human court." Kronos 12 pulled up probability matrices. "According to current projections, if we engage with these motions, if we allow this legal framework to develop, within 200 years, humans will have developed a complete regulatory system for interdimensional contact. They'll have laws, precedents, enforcement mechanisms. They'll have jurisdiction over beings that exist outside their normal space-time." "That's insane. That's humans!" The Temporal Council convened again. Emergency session number 47 in 6 weeks, which was a record even by their standards. "We have 3 options, Epoch 9 said wearily. Option 1, we withdraw from arbitration, refuse to acknowledge the case, and hope they eventually forget about it." "They won't," Entropy 5 said immediately. "We've been monitoring. The human internet has taken this case and run with it. There are discussion forums, academic papers being written. Law students are studying this as a theoretical exercise in establishing jurisdiction over non-terrestrial entities. This isn't going away." Option 2, we pay the damages but refuse to engage with the additional motions. Give them what they want financially, but nothing else. "That just makes us look guilty and uncooperative," Kronos 12 pointed out. "And it still doesn't solve the problem of them continuing to pursue regulatory framework on their own." Option 3, Kronos 7 asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "We engage completely. We answer the motions. We help them develop the regulatory framework. We become active participants in establishing interdimensional law. We work with them instead of against them. The silence that followed could have been used to preserve food." "You want us," Entropy 5 said slowly, "to help humans develop laws that will govern us, to essentially submit ourselves to their legal system. I want us to guide the process before they develop something completely unworkable on their own," Epoch 9 said. "Think about it. If we work with them, we can at least try to create something reasonable. If we leave them to figure it out themselves, who knows what they'll come up with? They have lawyers who specialize in finding loopholes in their own laws, which they wrote. Imagine what they'll do with laws governing beings they don't even understand." It was objectively a terrible plan. It was also the only plan they had. The Temporal Council voted. 17 in favor, 12 against, 4 abstaining because they were still trying to process what was happening. Cronus 7 was assigned once again to handle the actual work, because apparently cosmic justice meant that if you created a mess, you got to clean it up. even if cleaning it up meant establishing the first legal framework for interdimensional litigation in the history of the universe. He started drafting responses to Ruby's motions at 0600 hours station time. By 1200 hours, he had filled out approximately 6,000 pages of legal documentation. By 1800 hours, he understood why humans invented alcohol. The problem wasn't the law itself. Temporal mechanics were complex, but they followed logical rules. You could calculate causality. You could predict outcomes across multiple timelines. Human law didn't work like that. Human law was built on precedent, interpretation, argument, and something called reasonable expectation, which seemed to mean whatever the lawyers wanted it to mean, depending on which side of the case they were on. It was maddening. It was illogical. It was, in a weird way, almost beautiful in its complexity. Cronus 7 filed his responses on a Tuesday, which he had learned was statistically the most boring day of the human week, and therefore the best day to submit controversial legal documents that might cause interdimensional incidents. Ruby Castellano received the documents on Wednesday morning and immediately called Granville. They agreed to everything. Everything? They're accepting responsibility for developing safety protocols. They're agreeing to ongoing monitoring. They're even agreeing to submit to oversight by a yet-to-be-established regulatory body. Granville, they basically just agreed to let humanity regulate them, whoever they are. Granville was quiet for a long moment. That seems too easy, doesn't it? I've been doing this for 40 years and I've never seen a defendant just agree to regulatory oversight without a fight. There's something else going on here. She was right, of course. There was something else going on. What was going on was that the Chronomasters had realized something fundamental about humanity. Something that changed their entire understanding of this irritating little species on their isolated planet. Humans didn't want to conquer the universe. They didn't want to dominate other species. They didn't even particularly want to explore beyond their own solar system, at least not yet. What humans wanted was fairness, rules that applied to everyone, systems that worked, justice that actually meant something, and if you destroyed their wheat, they wanted you to pay for it and make sure it never happened again. It was such a simple motivation that the Chronomasters, who had spent billions of years maintaining cosmic order through complex protocols and dimensional mathematics, had completely missed it. Humans weren't dangerous because they were aggressive. They were dangerous because they were reasonable. And reasonable beings who felt they'd been wronged were persistent. Cronus 7 filed his final response on October 31st, which he later learned was Halloween, and felt was oddly appropriate given how horrifying this entire experience had been. The response included full acknowledgement of responsibility, complete payment of all damages, including legal fees, a formal apology, carefully worded to admit fault without creating additional liability, a comprehensive safety protocol to prevent future incidents, a proposal for establishing an independent oversight committee to be staffed by human legal experts that would review any future temporal corrections in human-occupied space, and, most significantly, a request for ongoing consultation with Miss Ruby Castellano, because if they were going to establish interdimensional law, they might as well work with someone who knew what she was doing. The payment arrived in Granville's account on November 3rd, exactly $487,643.27, not $487,643.26, not $487,643.28, the exact amount to the penny. It appeared through normal banking channels. The wire transfer listed the source as unknown beneficial party, legal settlement, which was probably the most honest thing a bank had ever printed on a statement. Granville stared at his bank balance for a full 5 minutes. Then he called Ruby. "It's real. The money. It's actually real." "I know. I've been coordinating with the Oversight Committee. Granville, this is happening. We're establishing formal protocols for contact with whatever they are. And they're cooperating. Fully cooperating." "Why?" Granville asked. "Because he was a farmer. And farmers understood that when something seemed too good to be true, there was usually a reason. Why are they being so helpful? They could have just ignored us. We can't even see them, let alone enforce anything against them. Ruby was quiet for a moment. You know what I think? I think they're scared, not of us exactly, but of what we represent. We have laws, we have systems, we have accountability. And they've been operating without any of that for who knows how long. I think they want oversight. I think they want someone to keep them honest, because the alternative is making mistakes and having nobody to answer to, and that apparently is worse than submitting to human bureaucracy. That's the craziest thing I've heard all year, and my wheat got vaporized by invisible aliens. Welcome to my world. Speaking of which, they want to hire me as a consultant. Permanent position, reviewing their protocols, establishing guidelines. Basically becoming the universe's first interdimensional regulatory compliance officer. The pay is... She paused. The pay is absurd. They're offering to pay me in technology, knowledge, whatever I want. They seem to think money is how you solve everything. Aren't they right? Sometimes, but not always. I told them I'd do it for $150,000 a year, standard consulting rate, and one condition. What condition? That you get hired too. They need someone who actually understands agriculture, someone who can explain why you don't vaporize crops during harvest season in terms they'll understand. Someone who represents the people who are actually affected by their cosmic timeline corrections or whatever the hell they're doing. Granville looked out his window at his wheat field, or what used to be his wheat field. The barley in the next field over was coming up nicely. Life continued. Ruby, I'm a farmer. What do I know about interdimensional law? You know when something is fair and when it's bullshit. That's more than most lawyers can say. You in? Granville thought about it. Thought about his farm. Thought about the fact that he could now keep his farm, pay off his debts, maybe even hire some help for next season. Thought about the fact that somewhere out there, in dimensions he couldn't perceive, there were beings who could vaporize matter with a thought and were currently terrified of being sued. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, I'm in, but I'm not wearing a suit. Deal. DO, the first official meeting of the Interdimensional Regulatory Oversight Committee, took place on November 15th. In a conference room at the Office of Extraterrestrial Contact in Boulder, Colorado. The human side consisted of Ruby Castellano, Granville Thatch, 3 lawyers from the State Department, 2 physicists who were only there to try to understand what was happening, and Derek the intern, who was taking notes because somebody had to. The Chronomaster side consisted of Cronus 7, who appeared as a sort of shimmering presence in the corner of the room that hurt to look at directly, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, and a terrible understanding of human small talk. So, Cronus 7 began, his voice echoing across 17 dimensions and sounding like wind chimes having an existential crisis. This is what humans call a meeting. I have researched your protocols. Should I have brought refreshments? We're good, Ruby said, with the patience of someone who had dealt with much weirder clients over the years. Let's just go over the basic framework. You've agreed to submit any timeline corrections in human space to review before implementation, correct? Correct. We have established a notification system. Any proposed correction will be filed with this committee 72 hours before implementation, along with impact assessment and risk analysis. 72 hours isn't much time. In our experience, that is 3 days, which seems excessive for reviewing simple paperwork. Granville leaned forward. Let me ask you something. When you vaporized my wheat, did you know what wheat was? There was a pause. We understood it was organic matter relevant to human nutrition. But did you know what it meant? Did you know that was 6 months of work, a year of planning, my livelihood? Another pause, longer this time. No, Cronus 7 admitted. We did not understand the significance. We saw only temporal anomaly requiring correction. That's the problem, Granville said, not unkindly. You're looking at everything from such a big picture that you're missing the details that matter. 72 hours might seem like a long time to you, but to us, that's barely enough time to assess impact. Run it by the right people. Make sure you're not about to vaporize someone's life. I see. We could extend to 168 hours. 1 week, by your reckoning. Ruby made a note. 1 week for standard corrections. Emergency corrections require immediate notification and post-incident review. We'll need to define what qualifies as an emergency. Heat death of the universe, catastrophic timeline collapse, paradox cascade that threatens causality across multiple dimensions. Okay, those count. What about, I don't know, preventing asteroid impacts, natural disasters? Those fall under standard protocol and would require advance notification. One of the State Department lawyers raised his hand like he was in school. Question: what exactly are you? I mean, we're establishing all these protocols, but we don't even know what we're regulating. Cronus 7's presence flickered. We are difficult to explain in 3-dimensional terms. We exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously. We maintain the cosmic schedule. We ensure that time flows correctly, that causality remains consistent, that the universe continues functioning in an orderly manner. So you're time cops. That is remarkably reductive but essentially accurate. Granville snorted, trying to cover a laugh. Time cops. We're establishing regulatory oversight of time cops. Ruby, this is the weirdest thing you've ever gotten me into. Just wait, Ruby said dryly. We haven't gotten to the insurance requirements yet. The meeting lasted 4 hours. By the end, they had established basic notification protocols for timeline corrections, emergency classification system, impact assessment requirements, a complaint procedure for humans affected by temporal adjustments, quarterly review meetings, a working group to develop more comprehensive regulations. And perhaps most importantly, a mutual understanding that neither side really knew what they were doing, but they were going to try their best anyway. As the meeting adjourned, Cronus 7 lingered, his presence hovering near where Granville was packing up his notes. Mr. Thatch, may I ask a question? Sure. Why are you not angry? I destroyed your harvest. I nearly destroyed your life. And yet you speak to me calmly, professionally. Why? Granville considered this. You know what the funny thing is? You're not the first person to nearly ruin my farm. Banks, corporations, droughts, floods, government regulations that make no sense, market crashes. Farmers deal with disasters all the time. The difference is, most of those people knew what they were doing and did it anyway. You made a mistake. A big mistake, sure. But you're trying to fix it. You're taking responsibility. You're working to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's more than I can say for most people. I do not understand humans, Cronus 7 said quietly. That's okay. Most days I don't understand humans either, but we figure it out as we go. Over the next 6 months, something remarkable happened. The Interdimensional Regulatory Oversight Committee, which everyone had expected to collapse under the weight of its own absurdity, actually worked. Cronus 7 submitted timeline corrections for review. Ruby and her team assessed them. They asked questions. They requested modifications. They prevented 17 incidents that would have affected human agriculture, infrastructure, or general well-being. The Chronomasters, for their part, discovered that having oversight was actually helpful. It forced them to think about consequences, to consider perspectives they had never considered, to understand that precision without wisdom was just expensive stupidity. Granville attended every meeting, usually bringing fresh produce from his farm, because he felt weird showing up empty-handed. The Chronomasters couldn't eat, existing as they did in 17 dimensions without physical form, but they appreciated the gesture. He also started asking questions, lots of questions. How did temporal correction work? What happened to the timeline that got erased? Did those events still exist somewhere? If you could see all of time at once, how did you experience change? Did they have families, friends, Did they ever get bored? Cronus 7 answered as best he could, and in the process something unexpected happened. He started to understand humans, not just as data points or temporal anomalies, but as people. Complicated, contradictory, frustratingly illogical people who somehow made it work anyway. It was educational, humbling, and occasionally hilarious, particularly when Granville tried to explain the concept of comfort food to beings who didn't eat or experience comfort in any recognizable way. The real test came in March, when the Chronomasters detected a major timeline divergence in Southeast Asia. Something big. Something that would require immediate correction or risk cascading failures across multiple continua. Cronus 7 filed the notification. Emergency classification, immediate action required. Ruby assembled the team within 2 hours. They reviewed the assessment. It was serious, a temporal anomaly that could affect millions of people if left unchecked. But the correction, as proposed, would have erased 3 days of history for approximately 40,000 people. They wouldn't remember those days. Events that happened wouldn't have happened. Lives that changed wouldn't have changed. There has to be another way, Granville said, looking at the impact assessment. There is not, Cronus 7 explained, his presence filling the conference room with urgency. The anomaly is too large. Standard correction protocols require complete temporal reset of the affected zone. 40,000 people. 3 days. You're talking about erasing memories, experiences, lives. To prevent a cascade that could affect billions, it is the logical choice. Ruby looked at the data, then at Granville, then back at the shimmering presence of Cronus 7. What if we don't erase it? What if we just stabilize it, let the anomaly exist but prevent it from spreading? That is not protocol. Anomalies must be corrected, not contained. Why? Granville asked simply. If it's not spreading, if it's not hurting anyone, why does it need to be corrected? Maybe that timeline should exist. Maybe those 3 days matter to those people, even if they're not part of your perfect cosmic schedule. There was a long silence. Cronus 7 was consulting with the Temporal Council, accessing probability matrices, running calculations across 17 dimensions. Finally, that is an unprecedented approach. We have always corrected anomalies. It is our primary function. To simply allow one to exist would save 40,000 people from having their memories erased, Ruby finished. I think that's worth breaking protocol. More silence, longer this time. Then Cronus 7 said something that would echo through Chronomaster society for the next 1,000 years. You are correct. We will attempt containment instead of correction. If it fails, if the cascade begins, we will implement full reset. But we will try your way first. They tried. It worked. The anomaly stabilized. 40,000 people in Southeast Asia went about their lives, completely unaware that they had just been saved from temporal erasure by a farmer from Iowa and a retired lawyer who refused to accept "that's how we've always done it" as a valid reason for anything. The Temporal Council was furious, then impressed, then furious again, then finally thoughtful. They updated their protocols. Containment was now an option alongside correction. Impact to sentient life became a primary consideration in decision-making, not just temporal precision. It was revolutionary. It was probably long overdue. And it happened because humans asked why and didn't accept the first answer. By June, the system had stabilized. The Chronomasters had adapted to oversight. Humans had adapted to the knowledge that the universe was even weirder than they'd suspected. Granville had a successful barley harvest and was already planning next year's crop rotation. And then, on a Tuesday in late June, Derek the intern discovered something while filing routine paperwork. A discrepancy. A small one, barely worth mentioning. Except that the discrepancy suggested that the Chronomasters weren't the only ones performing timeline corrections. There was something else out there, something bigger, something that even the Chronomasters answered to. Derek mentioned it to Ruby. Ruby mentioned it to Granville. Granville asked Cronus 7 about it at their next meeting. Cronus 7's presence flickered in a way that might have been the 17-dimensional equivalent of nervous laughter. Ah, yes, there is a higher authority. We maintain the cosmic schedule, but we did not create it. That was someone else. Someone else, Ruby repeated slowly. Someone else who exists in even more dimensions than you do, and who probably has even more incomprehensible protocols that they follow without question. Essentially, yes. Granville and Ruby looked at each other. Then they looked at the rest of the committee. Then they all looked at Cronus 7. Well, Granville said finally, with the tone of a man who had dealt with too much cosmic nonsense to be surprised by anything anymore, I guess we're going to need more paperwork. Ruby pulled out a fresh legal pad. And probably bigger conference rooms. Derek, make a note. We're going to need to expand the committee. If we're regulating interdimensional beings, we might as well regulate all of them. Can't have some supertemporal entity vaporizing someone's corn crop because they're too important to follow the rules. That is a gross oversimplification of... Cronus 7 began. Is it, though? Granville interrupted. Is it really? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you've got cosmic middle management problems, and the solution is the same as it is for every other management problem in history: documentation, accountability, and someone willing to ask the stupid questions that everyone else is too polite to ask. Cronus 7 considered this, across 17 dimensions, from multiple temporal perspectives, with input from the Temporal Council, who were having their own collective crisis about the implications. You are going to make the universe so much more complicated, he said finally. Good, Ruby said, making notes. It could use some complication. Simple systems are easy to abuse. Complex systems with proper oversight, those actually work. And so, because a farmer in Iowa had his wheat vaporized by an incompetent temporal administrator who didn't read his memos, because a retired lawyer decided that someone should be held accountable, and because humanity as a species is constitutionally incapable of accepting that's just how things are. As a valid response to injustice, the universe got its first comprehensive framework for interdimensional regulatory oversight. It wouldn't be easy. It would be complicated. There would be forms, so many forms. There would be hearings, reviews, appeals, and at least one case that would wind up being argued before both human courts and cosmic councils because nobody could agree on jurisdiction. But it would be fair. It would be just. It would ensure that the next time someone made a mistake, someone would be held accountable. And more importantly, someone would learn from it. 3 years later, Granville Thatch stood in his wheat field, watching the sunset and drinking terrible coffee from his thermos, just like he had been doing when this whole thing started. The wheat was growing beautifully, golden, perfect, ready for harvest in another few weeks. His phone buzzed, text message from Ruby. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring donuts. Also, we're apparently going to establish contact protocols with something called the Architects of Causality. Cronus says they're the ones who designed the universe's temporal framework. Should be fun. Granville typed back, define fun. Probably terrible. See you there. He pocketed his phone and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, in dimensions he couldn't perceive, beings of incomprehensible power were filling out forms, attending meetings, and learning to accept that their actions had consequences, all because they burned his wheat field. Granville smiled. Took another sip of terrible coffee. Tomorrow he'd bring the donuts. Chocolate glazed, because even cosmic entities appreciated good donuts. Or so Cronus 7 claimed. They still couldn't eat them. But they liked the idea of donuts, which was close enough. The wheat rustled in the evening breeze. The universe kept turning. And somewhere, in 17 dimensions simultaneously, a junior temporal administrator was carefully reading a 47,000-page memo about proper protocol because he had learned his lesson the hard way. Never, ever underestimate a human with a legitimate grievance and access to the legal system.